Okay, today's topic is deep fakes, and we are now at a position where artificial intelligence can clone our voice and generate super realistic photos and even videos. This obviously has implications. It helps to spread misinformation and disinformation, potentially causes a security threat on a national level if we can fake what presidents are saying. And it can also become potentially a useful business tool. To discuss this, I am joined today by AI expert Eric Haller. Hi, Eric.
Hey, Bernard. Thanks for having us on the show.
It's so good to have you. So, you are Experian's Executive Vice President and General Manager of Identity Fraud and Data Labs. And together, we will be exploring deepfake technology and how it can be used um, for good, hopefully, and also how cyber criminals are using it to exploit this technology. Before we go into the super exciting topic, maybe you can give us a little overview of who Experian is and what you do.
Yeah, sure. Well, Experian is a large multinational information services company. We cover a lot of ground. Most of your listeners probably know us by credit reports. If they're in a major country, we operate typically the largest credit bureau in the larger national markets. But we do much more than that. We do much more than that. So we are in the backbone of a lot of decisioning software. We do a lot of modeling, whether it's for targeting or for credit applications, risk management, fraud. We are very active in the healthcare market and actually in about half of all the hospitals in the U.S. in the backbone around things like determining somebody's identity when they enter into a hospital to doing the hard work of making sure their insurance is active and works with them throughout the process. We're in the automotive industry. We are in targeting, like I said, commercial credit. We cover a lot of ground. My role within the business is principally at first R&D. So I manage our R&D labs on four continents, here in North America, as well as in London, Sao Paulo, and Singapore. And then I also wear another hat, which is I manage our overall portfolio for identity and fraud products around the globe. So I manage that business as well.
Very good. So looking at the innovation part of the organization, maybe we can start by looking at what you see in terms of future developments when it comes to AI more generically. What are some of the things that you are seeing, some of the things you are excited about?
So there's a few areas. It all depends on what area you want to drill into. We're putting a lot of energy around AI transparency and fairness. So that would be, I would say, kind of a big bucket of things that where that might be impactful. The thing about AI, especially in regulated environments, is being able to have that transparency in how a decision is made. I think there's been a lot written and discussed about that transparency over the last few years, as well as fairness. How do we know we're making a good judgment so that the black box, so to speak, is opened up and everyone can make sure that the weights and measures in optimization are effective and fair. So that would be one bucket. I'd say the advances in natural language processing, which actually obviously has impact here in deepfakes, which we'll be talking about. That is growing by leaps and bounds. I mean, that is probably one of the most exciting areas in AI that we touch on, and we can get into that. Um, Modeling itself, I would say, we're going to talk about generative adversarial networks probably at some point during this conversation. In the field of deep learning, there's been so much media attention around that in the last, say, 6 or 7 years. But that does continue to evolve, and I think it's more around maybe less about the evolution of deep learning at this stage, more about the application of deep learning. So I would say that is there. We don't do a lot in, say, computer vision. Vision. That's obviously a very exciting area, but it's just not our where we're at right now in the labs. Um, And then maybe you could flip around and go into the where cyber and cryptography and AI pull together. I would say that is also a very exciting area. We spend a lot of time, just in the world of data and privacy and making sure that you might have to have, we'll call it double blind exchanges of data, where something like a secure multi-party computation might come into play. I think the challenges there historically have been around the efficiencies in the algorithms and being able to balance the computational load required to support these things versus the benefits of what you're trying to achieve. And I think that's made some fantastic progress. So I could
Yeah,
keep it's there's a lot going on obviously in the world of AI.
absolutely. And you touched on some of the things that I get excited about. So the progress in natural language processing, so the ability for us to communicate with machines, but also the ability of machines, obviously, to mimic our voice. And then we have machine vision that is pretty exciting, but also the ability of machines to generate images, be it photos or videos. And so which brings us nicely to the topic of deep fakes. How would you describe the current landscape? What do you see that concerns you? What are you potentially excited about? Maybe we can start by what you would define as a deep fake.
So the market, created this term, kind of like the combination of deep learning and fakes and leveraging deep learning in the world of fakes. And I think that's where deep fake came from. I, you could say that the notion of deep fakes has existed since before we were born. Counterfeiting is not an abnormal thing. People used to counterfeit money. They probably still do. It's just we don't carry as much cash around in our wallets anymore. Um, but and then you can kind of think back to watching old spy movies and the CIA's in the movie trying to figure out if we're watching a video that's real or not. And I mean, all those things still happen today. So it's all real, but it's not like a new notion as much as it is about the full, I'll say 100% computer created fake, which is more of a newer notion. Um, how I would define it beyond that, I think, I would probably segment it a little bit in that there is the notion that we say like a TikTok video of Tom Cruise, right? It's kind of a one way expression, and in that one video and voice of somebody who's it's of a person that we know. And so the bar is pretty high, actually, in the world of fakes, trying to express somebody that we know. Probably a little less about Tom Cruise because he's kind of a caricature in a way, but like you and your family to fool one of your family members, very, very high bar. So, but anyway, it's a one-way thing. You're not having a dialogue with your TikTok video. You're observing it. You're hearing it. You might be influenced by it, but you're not really going back and forth. Then there's the other side, which is somebody that you're interacting with. And I would kind of branch that out as well. It could be somebody that's completely fictitious. And you brought up some points already about, computer created images, computer created voices. It's probably a lower bar to create somebody that does not exist than to simulate somebody that does exist and then have an interactive dialogue with them. All of that is on the table. It's like the world is progressing, I'll say, in stages, where I'll call it my greatest fear, the sum of all fears, is that interaction that actually fools somebody that knows the individual they're interacting with. I think we're a long ways from there, but that would be my greatest concern. So that would be my greatest, and we can dig into that a little bit because that requires a confluence of a lot of different technologies, and which all need to develop further from where they are right now. But the lower bar, that's very credible today.
Yeah, I agree. And the title of the session is Deep Fakes, the good, the bad, and the ugly. So I guess that this technology can be used for good as well. So we have
Yeah.
these algorithms that can generate voice, that can generate videos, photos that are used for lots of good causes. I've recently done a video and an article about how we can now generate synthetic data, and especially synthetic images that are used to train deep learning algorithms to help us better monitor the state of people driving cars. So,
Mm.
because sometimes it's very difficult to get real footage of them, we can create those. That's good. And I have been using some of those technologies for some time myself. So, I started off using a tool called Descript that I trained my voice in. So this is a software that I use to edit some of my online courses, for example, and they now have this ability to edit this almost like a Word document, saying I didn't want to say big data, I want to say deep learning, and then I simply retype this, and it will then speak it in my voice, which is pretty fascinating.
Wow.
And more recently, I have now started creating a digital avatar for myself. So I spend a bit of a time in a studio recording myself, and now we have a product, a me in a video that can. And this what is exciting is this company called Synthesia, and they're now working together with this company called Descript, and they're integrating this. So you have my voice and my digital me, and I can now simply give it any text I want, and it is able to create a video of me speaking, saying anything in my voice, which is pretty crazy stuff.
The good, and that is the good and the bad, huh? Isn't it?
Yeah, that's a good. The bad. What would you say are what areas are you particularly concerned about when it comes to to deep fakes?
So, we could talk about kind of, I'll call it the basics right now, and then what really gets me anxious. Um, the low bar right now is, if you think about today, there's so much that's moving to digital that was face to face, and that is, I would say, and I've heard my colleagues say, we've probably seen a 10-year acceleration to digital in the last 18 months because of the pandemic, and I believe that. I actually, my 94-year-old father-in-law does, orders his groceries online, and a year and a half ago, that would, that would have never happened ever. It's more of it's just the way the world has moved on. As a result, we're seeing how we apply for things like credit or anything of value that we're going to wind up doing. It's going digital. So as a result, who you're interacting with becomes a pretty big deal if it's not face to face, and determining that it's not a bot and that it's a live person becomes a deal. And so there are a lot of technologies out today that will do like liveness testing. Can you bring your phone up to your face, and I can make sure you're a real person? And that actually
Hmm.
happens, especially in obtaining lines of credit around the globe. That's kind of a phenomenon that's happened and spurred on. But in a deep fake, if I have access, we'll say, to some YouTube video clips, Facebook pictures, etc., I should be able to construct something that, if it's a machine viewing doing a liveness test, I may be able to fool it, right? And that's what we don't want. If it's a human being, they don't know you, right? So they're just trying to figure out if you're a live person. That all of a sudden, that becomes a real legitimate risk, and that's something that we're focused on right now. Obviously, there's a lot of other pieces to the puzzle that we can use to defend ourselves against that, right? We don't have to be duped by the video that we're watching, because it's being conveyed to us in a digital channel. So all the information around, we'll call it that channel, comes into play. How did you access the internet? What's the IP address that you're using? What's the device that you're using? Have you seen that device before? What do we know about them? There's so many things around it that allows us to, say, inoculate ourselves from the risk. Um, that I'd say is kind of like the low bar. That's like an easy one to overcome. I mean, you could say that there's been some pretty big deep fake fraud schemes. That there was one that got on the press a couple years ago. Somebody got duped out of about $250,000 from a deep fake fraud scam. But that is that's like the edges. It takes a lot of time and a lot of work, as you know, to create or construct something that's going to fool another individual about somebody that they know. That TikTok video of Tom Cruise, which is fantastic. I mean, if you've seen it, it's probably the best deepfake I've ever seen. But that was an actor that looks like Tom Cruise that then deep learning actually constructed to make it look even more like Tom Cruise, along with an actor who already understands his movements and his tones with deep learning applied to finesse it. It took a lot of work, a lot of work, a lot of time, a lot of effort to get to that level. And there's a lot of material already on Tom Cruise to leverage on top of the actor that actually works as a double for him. So, there's a lot of pieces to that puzzle that get you to that stage. But anyway, that while that bugs me that we have to deal with these kinds of things, that doesn't scare me. What makes me nervous, and this is kind of what you were talking about, natural language processing, the evolution in natural language processing is just fantastic. And if you play around with GPT-2 or GPT-3, and now the notion that GPT-4 is coming out, and for anybody who's listening and has no clue what we're talking about, it's a company called OpenAI that has kind of pledged their focus to natural language processing and evolving that, and they are just doing it. Backed up. Microsoft's put $1 billion in for services and cash. Elon Musk is behind it. I mean, this is probably one of the biggest movements that we don't hear much about that's taking place. And I can tell you for GPT-2, which is, I'll call it how the toddler is just starting to crawl. My daughter took it and built a Twitter bot, and I talked to that Twitter bot for about 45 minutes. Now, I knew it wasn't a human, but the insights were pretty crazy from what it was able to derive and talk in a casual conversation. GPT-3 takes that to another level. GPT-4, and all of a sudden we're talking about uh, the real world of no coding AI. It starts to feel a little matrix like, in terms of how code will be replicated and evolve. The conversations, you're not going to be able to tell the difference. I mean, I have my little tricks, right? You can fool GPT-3 by just asking it a math question, right? Like if you don't know the answer, if you think you're talking to a real person, just ask them like a math question, because it's not really trained to solve math problems, but it's trained to talk casually, and it's fantastic. It's fantastic. So anyway, I guess what I'm saying is when you get to a point where you cannot tell the difference between a person and a bot, then other things come into play, like training it to manipulate or negotiate. And there was work that Facebook was doing, gosh, now I think it's about 4 years ago, in deep learning, where they were trying to focus on negotiation, which in the world of online advertising, and negotiating over price or bidding on price, these kinds of things are probably a good use case. I mean, I'm not saying that they were doing anything unusual. I mean, it sounds very practical, but they shut it down because the results that were coming out were perplexing, and they couldn't explain it. The servers they had started talking its own meta language, and they couldn't figure that out. But I think it's the notion of training to persuade, which is a subtle difference from manipulate. So if you can't tell the difference from who you're talking to, and that bot or that AI can manipulate you in some way, now we have real problems. And so whether that's done in a voice you don't know, done in a voice you know, done in a video you don't know, or done in a video you don't know, it almost doesn't matter as much as if you think it's a real person or not. And if you're at that stage, that does cause me. That's where my concerns are.
Yeah, and for me, we are very clearly on the road towards that. At the moment, if you know a little bit about AI and machine generated images, you can spot deep fakes. But these are early systems, so in 5 years' time, we won't have that. And I think it would be much more difficult for the general consumer to differentiate fake voices and fake videos. And if you think about this, we make so many Zoom and video calls nowadays, and if you see the other person, if you listen to their voice and you can't really be sure whether this is actually the person or not you're talking to, that makes it really tricky. So what do you think are some of the risks then to consumers and to businesses that potentially deep fake technology could bring if it gets into the wrong hands?
So, we're focused on a lot of different things to try to frame this risk and build some solutions that will help protect people and businesses, right? Businesses are just as exposed as we all are for a variety of reasons. I was just talking about if you're a bank and lending, knowing that you're lending to the real person or not is a big deal. So
And
our
lots
focus
of banks use voice passwords.
at Schwab, my voice is my password. I had to say that like 3 times. And, in fact, I was
Yeah,
thinking about it as I was saying it. I was like, oh gosh, this is going to be so easy to crack. This is almost,
absolutely.
yeah. So yeah, it's a challenge. I think that, like I was saying before, because everything is being transmitted and interacted in a digital environment, there is, I'll call it a data payload associated with everything that provides us that insights to figure out, is this coming from something somewhere we know or somewhere we don't know? If it's somewhere we don't know, does it have a reputation for being bad or no reputation? Like we can start to manage the risks so that it is not a stretch to think that at some point we may have to truth mark. I'm calling it truth mark our interactions with each other, where
Mm.
I'm talking with you and I see something that says, you know maybe it's Experian, maybe it's not Experian, but somebody that says, hey, I'm talking to Bernard Marr, and I can be confident
Mm.
that that's the case because everything about where you're calling from, what you're leveraging, all the technology that you're using to talk with me or communicate with me, and somehow is known, and we've validated that it's safe. Um, that may wind up being easier than trying to figure out if the lips have been repixelated in some way, or your breathing or blinking is natural or not. I think it will get so tough to discern, and but the data is proving that out. I mean, we saw USC published a couple years ago about a deep fake analysis, and they said we can detect 95% of all deep fakes. And then Google last year came out with a contest. They poured it in like 3,000 deep fakes into a population of videos, and it was about 65%. And it just goes, in the world of GANs, it just kind of goes to show that that generative network over time gets pretty smart from that
Mm.
discriminating network, and that's its job, is to get better and better and better, and so you will see it's an optimization, right? You will see over time those things getting pretty dang close to each other. It's going to get harder and harder to tell the difference. Um, so anyway, that's why I'm not totally like freaked out over it. It just means that uh, everyone, whether it's your Facebook and you're operating a platform, or your Verizon and you're a carrier, just like today, if I get a call that might be spam, Verizon tells me before I answer it. We're gonna have to be that's how the world will, like, my opinion. That's how the world will likely evolve. That we will be able to at least be able to secure that technology envelope, even if we can't necessarily secure what we're looking at or talking to.
So have you got any views on how businesses or governments can mitigate the risks they might be facing?
So a little bit, yeah. I mean, I do think, like, what's happening right now with and I can't remember what federal agency it is. I want to say it's Homeland, but I might be wrong. But they just did a private public partnership with Adobe and Microsoft. I think BBC, actually from the UK, is in it. It's a very open public partnership where they're trying to create the frame, that we'll call it that legal framework, what kind of investments the government should be making in and around deepfakes. Um, Obviously, there's an education component to it, but there's going to have to be some point. where we'll probably need some guardrails around like what I'm saying about what should or likely will happen. Right now, anybody can kind of come up with their own approach. So over time, there probably needs to be some guardrails set up around that. Um, and I think private industry is already motivated to figure this one out. I like seeing guys like the BBC in because clearly they see the challenge of knowing what the truth is in what you're viewing becomes a big deal. Adobe, obviously, great reputation, around building digital documents that we can trust. So I think seeing some of those stakeholders in the process are good. Guys like Experian, totally, it's obviously a focus for us. It's a good thing, um, uh, and it'll evolve. It'll evolve. What we're working on.
Absolutely. What's your view on the pace that government and regulators are able to control this and regulate the deepfake space?
Well, I did mention about AI fairness and transparency, and I do think they can go a bit hand in hand. And I think, you know, obviously things are moving a lot slower on the regulatory side around this than we would expect. I think what we saw in 60 Minutes the other night might, kind of give some insights into the facts that, there should be a bit more constructive oversight. Defining fairness, I will tell you that mathematically, uh, there are a lot of different ways to define fairness, and when you're in the world of coding for fairness, that definition becomes an important influencer. So, I would like to see more insight. And by the way, it does get a bit tricky. How EU might define fairness could be different than the US. So, and there's nothing wrong with that, but I think making everyone aware of what the ground rules are will be very constructive. And I think, so we're talking about deep fakes. I actually think it's the same kinds of things around, we were talking about deep fakes for good. Well, obviously, I mean, there's a lot of fantastic things going on, and we're, yeah, in addition to all the things that you mentioned, you can go on like MyHeritage and upload pictures of your great grandparents and see them come to life. That's awesome. You can go to, a museum in Florida and listen to Salvador Dali and talk to Salvador Dali. I mean, I can't, I love this kind of stuff. I actually love to talk to Thomas Edison. That would be the guy that I'm just, I actually, I think I would really enjoy that. So somebody should do that. So there's a lot of cool things. I was talking to my daughter. She's really into Marvel. That's the millennial generation, or actually Gen Zers are very into Marvel, very, very into Marvel. And there'll be a time entertainment wise where you'll be able to construct your own Marvel movies and you'll be a superhero in the movie. And I think that's going to be fantastic. Like there's a lot of fun stuff, which is on the horizon because of this. So the question will be, what are the ground rules? And I actually think that the government can play a role there. I'd like to see that happen for sure.
Yeah, for me, it would be very interesting to see. So the whole idea of merging the real world and the digital world is happening probably faster than I was anticipating in many ways. We're now talking about the metaverse, where you have this complete digital universe where you can transition from, if you want to go shopping, you can go gaming, if you're going to go on an online casino, if you want to watch a movie, if you want to go to a concert, if you want to fight people in a video game, you can do all of this using potentially the same avatar. And I think in that sort of world, detecting deep fakes will even be more, almost impossible, or definitely more difficult. Because you haven't got the same constraints, because everyone is digital, so you can't even tell whether someone's lips are not pixelated or not, or whether they are or not. So definitely interesting things to think about in the future. Um, you're also heading up the data lab. Can you tell us a bit more about what you do there?
Well, so these labs, they do R&D across all the businesses. So it really is a pretty broad array. I would say Like one of the things in NLP, where I would say we are dabbling in the world of no code AI, where you know uh, we operate, well, say large databases with our clients that house our information, their information, helps them do a better job of building, say, better customer experiences for those folks that they serve. And and typically you have to have pretty robust technical skills to interrogate that data, analyze it, come up with some insights, and then be able to translate that into
Mm.
whatever actions you're going to want to take. What we're doing in the lab is trying to, I'll call it, I was going to say democratize, but that's not the right word. It's really unleashing the value of that data for people that may not have those technical skills. So being able to talk to in your voice, similar to how we talk to Alexa or Siri or Google, being able to talk to your data and
Mm.
being able to say, hey, what are the five most predictive factors in determining who my best customers are, and let the data come together and then tell me what that story is. It's going to talk to me, and it's going to render it on a screen. And so, like right now, we are very active in building that out to a point, as you can imagine. In the world of NLP, we get excited about GPT-3 and the potential of 4, but in interrogating data, that domain, it really, our US chief scientist said to me yesterday, GPT-3 is great, but for what we want to do, it's kind of like a child who gets random thoughts and gets distracted and walks away. So you kind of, I thought, I was like, oh my gosh, I got to use that someday. I'm using it the next day, because I'm like, that's a really good example of when you're trying to get specific. So it requires us to do a lot of focused development work on creating that no code environment, such that when people ask very prescriptive kinds of questions, we have a framework and environment that we can answer it productively. Um, but that, I think, is a very promising area. Not everything is so cutting edge. I mean, we just launched a product, probably the best national credit risk model that we've built using gradient boosted trees. So we're using machine learning. Um, it had to go through so many presses around fairness and transparency, which took us 3 years to get through. But the results are probably the most predictive model we've ever brought to market. And that gets us super excited, especially, with AI and particularly machine learning, uh, having less data to work with in a traditional environment can be inhibiting, but with machine learning, it really is able to tease out signals in a much better way, where our, I'll say, our newer methods of predictive modeling far surpass the older ones. And when there's less data, you can really see that difference pop. So, but I could keep going. We did a lot around COVID. Was in the media quite a bit around that. Um, Developing insights that were beyond what I would call the typical SIR model, or what we got caught the buzz in the U.S. around the IHME models, around helping to predict hospital hospital rooms and ventilator needs for ventilators, where we constructed our own, what I'd call, hotspot predictor, which could give us insights about 2 weeks ahead of where hotspots were going to come up. Because if you can imagine where we are in Experian, we're a bit more on the economic side of the challenge, not the medical side, but the economic side, to help understand where governments need to apply address the needs that are going to emerge for small businesses that may go out of business, or consumers that are associated with those businesses that all of a sudden are out unemployed. In Brazil, the lack of data was such an issue that we actually constructed a consortium with the United Nations, the World Health Organization, University of Chicago, to help on the analysis side here in the U.S. Help down in Brazil. We've got great universities in Brazil, but having some I'll call it heavy hitters outside of Brazil helped too, as well as partnering with Amazon and Microsoft and SAP, and constructed an environment that we could overlay with our predictive modeling, where we were anticipating needs for ventilators in the Amazon, marrying it up with folks in Sao Paulo that had the extra capacity for ventilators, and then facilitating that transfer, that armored car transfer of ventilators out to the Amazon in anticipation what the needs were there. So it actually, and very rarely in the business that I'm in, can we actually say we're doing things that are actually helping save lives. But in that case, the labs jumped in and did that, used data for good. That's what we say, we use data for good. But yeah, we cover a lot of different ground. It's actually, I created the labs about 10 years ago, and I'll tell you, it's my swan song, or whatever. It's it's always yielding interesting and great results.
So what's the approach to ethics when it comes to developing AI solutions in the data labs?
So, in our world, we are already regulated pretty significantly in pretty much every business that we operate in. So I'll say that's kind of ground zero. In the U.S., for U.S. listeners, it's like the Fair Credit Reporting Act and Graham Leach Bliley and HIPAA and the Driver's Privacy Protection Act, and it's there. There are guardrails set up everywhere. So even if we wanted to, which I'll just say if we wanted to could start pulling data assets together, we couldn't because the guardrails are so heavy that before we're allowed to even move data from one server to another, we have to go through a pretty rigorous process to make sure that we're compliant with the law. So that I always say is the low bar. That's the low bar. That is the I when we talk about AI fairness and transparency, I never get concerned about Experian only because that's part of our DNA. Like we don't really move until we've checked those boxes, versus maybe other folks in the world that don't have that kind of, we'll say, infrastructure in place. But beyond that, we do spend quite a bit of time talking about what's best for the consumer. So it's like we're not necessarily a what's best for the business, like what's best for Experian or what's best for our client. It's about what's best for the consumer, because in the end, ultimately, anything that we say or do can play out in an open market in front of everyone. And so we want to make sure that really, I think that is a higher bar because we all have kind of skin in the game on that one. We're all kind of thinking about what would we want as individuals. Let's put the law is the low bar. Where are we? And then that's where we go from there. And I think leadership in a company sets that tone for one, because if there aren't specific rules in place, then it's about leadership. But yeah, I think that's probably why we've obsessed a bit about the fairness piece. I mean, I would say there's 12 different ways mathematically to define fairness that we have in the shop, and then we started talking about all the biases, and you could say there's n number of biases, right? That biases never end. But I think right now we're operating with something like 86 different known biases that we're trying to make sure that we address in some way or another. So fairness is it's a big challenge, and so that's why I'd say it's the high bar.
Very good. So how do you think AI will transform Experian within the next 5 to 10 years?
So it is right now, I can tell you that. That's what keeps a lot of us at Experian is the excitement that we see about, when you're we are a data business principally. That was, I would say 10 years ago, I would have said data is the lifeblood of Experian. And I heard somebody the other day in a hackathon that we had, and they were giving a presentation about what they had developed. And they said, innovation is the lifeblood of Experian. I was like, I think that's better to say. I actually think the world has changed on us a bit. And it's not data, it's more about innovation, because that nexus between where tech is going and where we're at today is just, there is a much greater opportunity for us. And we see it. It's a matter, for in our shoes, the hardest part is prioritization. The hardest part is figuring out, okay, I got these 20 or 30 or 40 different things that I could be doing. What's going to yield the greatest benefit? And I think that is probably the biggest challenge we see across all of our businesses right now, is that, making sure that we're focused on the yields, that our time is maximized or optimized. Maybe we'll come up with an algorithm for that.
Very good. So to bring it back to the deep fakes topic, what would be your future predictions for this space, or your hopes or fears for the future when you think about how the whole deep fake technology landscape is developing, and how businesses need to respond to all of this?
I think in some subtle ways, we'll see a lot of positive things. Reconstituting old movies, bringing to life things that maybe we put to the side, entertainment value, things that you were talking about, the training, teaching, the learning in healthcare. I think subtly we're going to see the positive sides of that play out, and maybe we'll see some high spikes that will attract attention along the way that gets us excited. On the dark side of it, uh, again, kind of the same thing, subtly that most people won't pay attention to, but maybe banks will, or retailers, or people that are on the risk side of a digital interaction, and that may not catch much attention for a while, other than maybe consumers will see some new things pop up every now and then that will be like, oh, I have to protect myself in this way. I think we may be in for some big bad spikes, and I think that's what will drive typically a reaction, maybe a stronger government reaction or whatever. And those big bad spikes probably will be much more than a TikTok video of Tom Cruise or even Obama saying some things about Donald Trump, that we've seen in the past, which obviously is an Obama when the voice was great, by the way, but the video, eh. But anyway, I think it will play out in a bigger way, and that will draw some attention, and then more change will take place. It's one of those things where it's not going to go away. It'll evolve over time. We'll always be chasing it in some form or fashion. But before the big actions take place, usually you need something to trigger that. So that'd be my take.
Very good. Super fascinating topic. Deep fakes, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Thank you, Eric, for joining me today. Anyone who wants to re-listen to this or re-watch this, head to my YouTube channel, where you can see this and many other videos, and obviously my website, which has hundreds of articles on many of the topics, from deep fakes to GPT-3 to machine and deep learning, all the things we covered here today. So thank you very much, and I will see you soon.
Hey, thank you, Bernard. Take care.
Thank you.